All right, welcome to Social Distillation, a submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. And we're going to keep the nerd theme going today with getting back to the Great Hunt. And we are on chapter 29. We stopped there because there was some important things, certainly some interesting things, as we get back to Jeff from Bornhold, who we had met earlier very much earlier in the book with something is going on with the White Cloaks, right? And he's been sent up to this contested area with a full legion, 2,000 men, but he's having to deal with the command. He's under the command of the questioners, who have him split up and doing strange and annoying things, and he's wondering why we aren't looking into the dark friends that are farther west. Which,
well, and just kind of to set your mind, your stage mentally, think of this age of information we're in now and how readily available everything is, and we're still going, what the fuck is going on in Ukraine? So now go back where there's no internet or anything like that. He's getting reports from the West that it's like telephone game. Yeah. This person tells this person, tells this person, tells this person, tells the messenger has to get it right when he gets to the end. And then you have to be like, and then it's before Twitter, but you still had limited words you could put on a piece of paper, especially quickly. So it's, and you're getting partial messages, how many doves got to you of the ones that were sent out, how many pigeons, excuse me. And it's just all of these factors that can go into miscommunication. And then he gets out there and sees these questioners doing all this crap. And it's a very confusing message, and he's got to make sense of it all. And remember, we've talked about Bornhold before. He's pretty much the only reasonable White Cloak until you meet the leader of them later. But at this point in our experience, he's the only reasonable White Cloak in the leadership.
Yeah, and he's a true believer, but he's not a zealot like Bayer. Bayer is a zealot to the cause. Bornhold is a true believer in the goodness, the righteousness of what he's doing. He's doing it because he's genuinely convinced this will help humanity. Right? So think back to the Eye of the World and his interactions with Perrin and Egwene, and Bayer was rigid and harsh because these were wrongdoers, these were dark friends in his eyes. Bornhold genuinely wanted them to confess to save their souls, right? And so now he's conflicted, and he's got to figure out how to balance that with also the orders that he's been given to follow the questioners. And in this scene, we see that some riders came in, and they appeared to be bandits, but one of them, or two of them at least, bore the description of two of Bornhold's men that had been linked to the questioners. And so he's starting to see the kind of shenanigans that they're pulling here. And they haven't met the Sanchin yet, because he mentions, let's see how we do against these invaders, Bayer, before we look down on these men. Yes. So he still hasn't met them. We still haven't met them. All we've heard is rumors so far. And we're going to be encountering them soon.
Yeah. And this is kind of it's an independent area that's been fought over by two other areas. So yeah. It's going to be even more cloudy what information there is, because now you've got two conflicting sides, which is kind of probably where you're getting your information from, your sources in those sides, in an area that's kind of isolated and doesn't do a whole lot except maybe a little trade here and there, and all of a sudden the trade stopped.
Yeah, let's actually, and this was actually set up beforehand, which is interesting because it's right in line with what Ingtar was talking about on the way down, as they were first following the horn. That's one of the things that, you know, has him kind of melancholy, is humanity's falling ever since kind of its height of Arthur Hawkwing, and it's been kind of falling ever since. So you have these vast stretches of the world that just aren't really claimed by anybody. Let me share screen.
Oh,
I actually I'm gonna bring up the map while we're talking about this. So I'd love to flip back to the map so we know what we're talking about. So you've got this huge Almouth plain between these two countries, Air Domain and Terrebonne, and it's all pretty well independent, especially Falm out here, which is a decent sized coastal town. And Terrebonne and Air Domain.
It just makes me think of Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
Florida, that's America's wing.
Yeah. Anyway, so Jordan is building on top of the rumors and the confusion. And Bornhold is getting set to, you know, this scene is relatively quick, and he's making the decision that, all right, you know, screw this, we're going to start putting the Legion back together, contact all of those we can find, and we're going to move west. We're going to, you know, actually go after the real enemy here. And then after that, we cut to Baal Doman, and now we're actually going to meet the Sanchin.
And everybody remembers Doobie Doobie Doo from the flight down the river where Rand and Matt and Tom all jumped on board. And this is one of the first times you really see a bit character come back and start to become a more prominent role, I think.
Well, we saw him very briefly a long time ago in Karheen when people were trying to get him killed and take his stuff. Because he had found one of the seals. And then it was a brief scene, and he decided, all right, they want me to sail west, so I'm going east. And now he's been sailing east for a good long while. He's kind of up the world a bit, way away from Ilion.
You mean west? Sail west.
West. Yeah, other way around.
Yeah.
I just opened the map and looked at it and said, oh, duh. So
he's going it's actually
away
kind
from
of
where he wanted him.
It's kind of genius, because it's not just that he becomes a little bit more prominent later. It's the fact that you've created a character where you can give snippets from around the world, and it all makes sense because he travels all over the world.
Yeah,
and relatively quickly, being for that time period.
And in that brief scene we saw before, we saw Ilion, which we're going to come back to. We referenced Tyr and Mayan, which we're going to come back to, and now we're getting to see Falm and the Sanchin, and that's going to be very important as we reach the climax of this book. But the first thing we see right off the bat is the brain fart, the Domine and the whatchamacallit,
the Soldem.
Yeah. So we see them right off the bat because they're using the power to, you know, firing shots across the bow to bring him in.
Yeah, not a random tidal wave to take out a little girl on the beach, but an actual. This would have been a nice introduction to them. They could have been capturing Doman, but then you would have to, you know, cast an important character and include him in the story and that.
Yeah, which, I mean, he's a useful character to have, like you say, because you can, and he is going to come up, you know, in a couple of books here, be quite important. It would have been a kind of a good tease to end on, but they wanted their big dramatic CG scene, I guess. But you also, you get the the rigid militarism and the arrogance of the Sanshin, because they are undefeated. They have this incredible military power and they are unstoppable, right? So they're the Mongol Empire. Nobody can stand against them.
And other similarities is their leader is considered godlike.
Yes.
Which Genghis and then Genghis Khan were considered gods.
And to the extent that here Eganin leaves a lone soldier on Doman's ship, and he has absolutely no fear of being alone. There's the full expectation that these people are now cowed and they are going to follow us because we are mighty. And we're introduced to the oaths, so we get an idea of what's going on here, of this return. And then we get a bit of a tease as he gets into Falm with some of the monsters that we've heard rumors about, of why they're certainly dark friends from the White Cloak perspective, because they use what must be Trollocs or Trolloc type things in their armies. And we see a couple of those from Dolman's point of view. And
and if we rewind, we've seen some of these before, and in an alternate universe.
We recognize the description of the big, frog bear beak funky things that are guarding Turak's manor that he's in, but he has no idea what these are. But this is a nice tease to the reader to go, holy crap, what's that? How do they have these things? Where did these come from?
Which would lead you to kind of go down some conclusions about the alternate universe, that these people were back and they ruled everything.
And everything had been turned loose back into the wild. So we meet a High Lord. So we see even more that rigidity of and I think someone has talked about this before, and I don't remember who. I should have mentioned it as a tease to what's going on here, of how Arthur Hawkwing. No, I think Elias talked about it when they got to that stedding, and they were talking about the new capital that was going to be built, and how the ordinary people, had all donated the funds to build this giant statue of him that was going to be the literal center of his new capital, that would be the center of the continent, the center of his empire, because the people loved him, because he brought peace and prosperity and justice for the common man, but that justice was incredibly harsh. And so the upper classes resented him because of the harshness of his rule. And these people are descendants of that. And you're going to get a glimpse of the bastardization of that through how the High Lords, the blood, behave and are treated, and how people must act around them.
I think the other important thing to take from this is we get a very descriptive look at the, just the surface level stuff, the armor, the regalia, everything. So we get a good idea. If they get this wrong in the show, it's not like they didn't have very, very deliberate source material to go by. But go ahead.
It'll be like all the memes about season 1 of The Witcher and the funky black armor of the what are the invader people called?
Nilfgaard.
The Nilfgaards, yeah, compared to what they look like in the games, and it's just inexplicable. Not just why they changed it so much, but why they changed it to something so bad. I think you did see a little bit of it in that little epilogue scene
Mhm.
of mostly though it was the Soldam and Domine.
Yeah, and I don't mind the way they portrayed them too much because it kind of gives you that hint that the Soldem know the weaves.
mhm.
And they actually did a better job of showing weaving with them than they did with the Aes Sedai the whole rest of
Which
the
all
season,
looked the same.
which all looked the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And the since I'm a nerd and James Rigney was also a big history nerd, there's a clear inspiration here for something called the Grand Fleet, and it was during I think the 1300s. China was the Chinese Empire, I can't remember which dynasty it was very nearly a colonial power several centuries before Western Europe became colonial powers.
Mhm.
But when they sailed out, they didn't find anything interesting, and they said, "All right, everything else sucks. We're just going to stay here now." Um, and so you picture a Chinese junk. Okay, well now imagine one like 5-6 times that size. They
Mhm.
built these huge ocean-going ships, and I believe it was a fleet reportedly of about 300 ships, and they sailed all through the South China Sea. I don't think they ever went all the way down to Australia, but they did go into India. They did spend some time around the Horn of Africa, East Africa. They brought back some animals, some trophies, some things like that after sailing around and showing the flag, and then decided none of this is as interesting as everything we have here in the Middle Kingdom, the center of the universe. So we're just going to stay here now.
Mhm.
And that's the inspiration for the look and the style. You have very much a kind of Mongol / Chinese empire at its height of power. But we're on a continent separated by an ocean so vast that nobody thinks there's anything on the other side.
Mhm.
And so rather than, giant horse armies, they've come in a giant fleet to continue conquering the world. And so the look is very similar to that era, and it's a stark contrast to the mostly European style of dress and armor that we have seen so far.
Mhm. Well, also, they kind of start bringing in the concept of that they're coming back not because they want to expand, but because they believe that area is already theirs.
The return in capital, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a gripe I have about the series is one of the reasons I think that Jordan was so particular in making the main continent so European is to make the Sanshin so alien.
Mhm.
Not just in the look, in that they are very much a multicultural society. You're going to see
Mhm.
more and more, racial archetypes and skin hues and all that. But then also that armor style is alien. I
Mhm.
mean, there are a couple times where people looking at it for the first time comment they almost look like insects,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't even look like armor in the traditional sense that they think of it.
I I always pictured, and it's completely way off, but the helmets made me always think of it was Lando from Return of the Jedi when he was at Jabba's.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I always pictured as their helmets for some reason because it's kind of got that mandible look
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
forward. But
yeah.
the rest of it would be way off. But every time it was described, that's what popped in my head.
But when we were in Shinar, we saw kind of that Eastern style of armor
Mhm.
already.
With the overlaying plates and
Whereas in the descriptions that we get in Eye of the World and the Dragon and in the Great Hunt, they are culturally very much like the samurai at their height, but the way they're described in battle, they are very much the classic, almost French heavy knight because they have to be, because they're
fighting Trollocs.
they are holding this gap
Yeah.
against creatures that are 7+ feet tall, wielding monstrous weapons. So they have to have the heavy armor to protect them and their horses, and have that shock value and all that. So
Well, and they
they're
described
decked
it as-
out in plate and mail and multiple, mace and axe, along with a couple of different swords and lance and shield and all that.
Yeah, when you get a good description of that, when later on, when we get another prominent general that we were introduced to in the last book, but he talks about them because he's recruiting some of them for what he's doing, and he talks about them being the best heavy cavalry
Yes.
in the country, or in the continent, I guess.
Yeah.
And actually gives a little bit of description. So you have source material description. You just got to, read a couple books ahead. Maybe that's the problem. They're reading as they go.
You also have to think about why it is the way it is, right? This isn't arbitrary. Pretty much nothing Jordan did was arbitrary. And you could just tell that by the complexity of the story and the way things keep building layer upon layer.
Oh, but instead they just make a wall with arrow slits and give them crossbows.
Yeah. Well, we move on from there back to kind of the main story, the main group with Rand. And we're getting an introduction to the Kyrenian scheming. With the Rand continually getting the invites.
Well, and Perrin continually not helping by acting more and more the servant.
Yep. Yeah, trying to get Perrin to knock that off. And this is, I believe, yeah. So he's gotten the invitation from the king and the guy who is next in power to the king, almost rival to the king in power. And so now he's just kind of instinctively, so he's accidentally been playing the game and playing it well so far by just chucking the invitations in the fire. And now he has to purposefully think through, okay, well, now I've kind of backed myself into a corner. What do I do? Because I can't throw away these invitations or someone's going to stab me in the back or in the face. So he actually is cunning enough to figure out how to buy himself some time here. And so he comes up with a pretty decent plan for just, I'm going to look at these invitations, make sure everyone sees the seals are still sealed, and it'll buy me some time. And then the main thing that happens in this chapter is that, and then when he gets back to the inn, it's on fire. He and Loyal have to go in to rescue Hurray. The chest is gone. And he does rescue the dragon banner because he doesn't want to, but Moiraine can't lie, and she said it might save his life. So he rescues that instead.
And this is where we get a little bit of kind of what you're going to see from Rand for quite some time now, where he's learning and he's doing better, but he keeps stubbing his toe on his own stubbornness.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to play the game. I don't want to play the game, but he's in a position where he has to.
Yep, he has to. You also, I like the way, I really like the way the chapter ends, because you do see Rand the man, that when the rest of the group find him, he's so despondent and apologetic to Mat that he doesn't even care about the horn. I had it, Mat. I had the dagger and I lost it. I'm sorry. So Is there anything about,
Is it Huron that's injured? I'm trying to remember.
yeah, Hurray is injured, Verin
Yeah.
heals him. And then he goes off to follow the scent. And so while they're waiting, where is it? It kind of, yeah. So when we
Well, while you're looking for that, this is again, I keep going back to the progression of Rand, right? So he went from helping his friend and being somewhat of more of a leader to helping three people ultimately when Celine shows up, to being more of a leader, doing heroic deeds in the process, coming into this town where he doesn't want to play the game and being stubborn, but learning the game of houses. And this is the importance of the buildup of all the books is Rand doesn't learn by being told.
Yeah.
If he was just told how to play the game of houses by Moiraine or Tom or somebody else who understands it, he would have never learned it correctly. He has to learn by doing because he's so stubborn and independent. And so we're seeing him progress to a gradually greater leader, but also learning these skills along the way, the hard way.
You're right. Good point too, that when Ingtar and the rest of the group shows up and okay, we've lost it. What do we do now? And he just immediately instinctively takes charge and starts saying, okay, well, let's do this, let's do that. And then
I didn't know exactly where we were, but that was the next step because he's leading 3 and now he's leading the group of.
And then he's a little bit of embarrassed and apologizes to Ingtar, who is also seeing this. He's seeing this more than Rand is seeing this, that Moiraine chose well that for you to be the second.
But notice as soon as Ingtar says something, Rand is like, crap, no, I'm not that. I'm not that.
Yep. Because he doesn't like being
told.
I'm
just a farm boy. I'm just a wolf. Blah, blah, blah.
On Ingtar, this and then into the next scene, we haven't talked much about it, but we see the kind of the increasing desperation of Ingtar to get the horn, because the horn is salvation for man. This is what was being set up way back in that first chapter after they've set off from Faldara, when he's talking about, as they enter these lands that kind of belong to nobody and humanity just barely holding on. And for him, the horn represents salvation for humanity that he sees as on the verge of being swept away and obliterated by the shadow. So he's becoming increasingly desperate. And then Huron is the one who's the real believer in the pattern. The pattern will take care of things, right? What will be will be. And we also see, thanks to Rand, that he kind of awkwardly, but he kind of stands up to Ingtar a little bit when Ingtar gets a little overzealous of, that's not the way it should be. What will be will be. But when we get more into that scene, so once they've gotten off the street and they get to another inn, and we switch to Perrin's perspective, which is interesting because now we're seeing what you were talking about with what Rand has become, and Perrin is seeing that of how we've all changed. We've all changed so much. It's only been at this point, maybe 6 months since they left Edmonds Field. Thereabouts,
somewhere around there.
So it's been
maybe not even that much, because it depends on how long. It's only a couple days in Faldara. So
no, you're right, because it was Beltane. It was the beginning of spring, or supposed to be spring.
Remember, the 3 months later, if you moved at 25 to 30 miles an hour, which is a walking, trotting pace, then you would have gone across the whole continent.
Right. Then. Yeah, it was weeks there, and then it wasn't Yeah, it was still summer while they were in Shinar in the opening of this. So it had not been quite that long that they had been there. So it's been a few months that they've been away from home, and Perrin is looking at Matt, who is acting healthy but looking gaunt and sickly, and Rand, who he's thinking shadow killer. This is someone so frightening that the wolves are in such awe of him they won't go near him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he himself, with his yellow eyes and his ability to talk to wolves, so they've all got secrets and they've all been changed.
Well, except at this point, Matt really doesn't have a secret because they know why he's getting sick. It's because he doesn't have the dagger. It's funny because there's a little bit of irony there that Matt's the most honest one in the group at the moment.
Yes. Yeah. Right now he's, look, he just wants the dagger. And he wants to get healed and he wants to go on about his life. So skipping along to Lord Barthane's manor. So they figure out that's where the horn is, and they're going to play the game of houses to go investigate the manor. Barthanes is an interesting figure because we see the different kinds of dark friends. We've seen
kind of different,
and we've seen kind of different classes of people and why they're doing what they're doing. Barthanes is so arrogant. He kind of acts like he's one of the Forsaken. Like, I'm so important, I can still follow my own agenda while following the orders of the shadow of the things I'm supposed to do.
So, and he is a lord. And if you, the few times we've been in the heads of dark friends, they do it because most of them do it because they're promised a position of power. It's all about the power.
And he's already got the power, so much power that he is literally scheming to overthrow the current king so he can be king.
So he can only imagine power greater than what he has for his motivation. Versus a villager, which, power greater than what they have, maybe, mayor.
So when he's once they get inside and after a little bit of shenanigans, and then he comes up to talk to Rand, and he is fully playing the game here. When he's talking to Rand, he's trying to figure out. So we know he's a dark friend. Rand knows he's a dark friend, and Barthanes has to know that they know. Well, maybe he doesn't have to know that because he doesn't know why they're there exactly. But I would think he has to suspect that they know, and yet he's quizzing Rand to find out who is this strange Outlander lord. Why is he here? Why was he looking into more dark friends?
More dark friends.
So he's got something major going on in his manor with these dark friends who have stolen the Horn of Valir. I would guess he doesn't know what it was, but it's something important that have brought all these dark friends to hide in his manor and, give him orders. And yet he still wants to play the game. He wants to know what Rand was doing at that dig of the king and what he thought about it. See whose side he's on. See, how can I use you to my advantage in my schemes in parallel to this other thing that he's got going on. And I think that's the answer to my question that I have later on of what's going to happen to Barthanes. But for now, I think the most critical thing to happen is that when they do find the horn, they follow to where the path leads, and it's in a walled off garden that has a waygate at it.
Mhm.
And when he opens the waygate, Machin Shin is right there, and it seems like it's trying to push its way outside,
Mhm.
even though everyone tells him that should be impossible.
And this is important too, because we got to remember at this point, Padden Fane has some connection to Machin Shin, and all of a sudden it's sitting there right at a waygate that they possibly have gone through.
As Moraine says after her interrogation, they ask, well, how did he get by Machin Shin? He didn't. He encountered Machin Shin, and Machin Shin found in Fane a kindred spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a deep, deep evil there and psychosis that made that insanity, that dark
Mhm.
insanity, think, oh, hey, friend.
Yeah, and remember, Machin Shin's not a creature of the dark. Machin Shin's a creature of corruption.
Yes.
So it was the corrupting of the ways, just as More Death was the corruption of Eridhall.
So now crap, they've taken it through the ways. So what do we do? And as they're leaving the party here, where is it? Barthanes, so 478, they're leaving. There's a little bit of banter, and then he says, he grabs hold of Rand and wants to talk to him privately. You wade even deeper in the game than I thought, Barthanes said softly. When I heard your name, I could not believe it, yet you came, and you fit the description. And I was given a message for you. I think I will deliver it after all. Rand had felt a prickling along his backbone as Barthanes spoke, but at the last he stared. A message? From whom? Lady Selene? A man, not the sort of whom I would usually carry messages, but he has certain claims on me that I cannot ignore. He gave no name, but he was a Lugarder. Ah, you know him. I know him. Fane left a message. Rand looked around the wide hall. Matt and Verin and the others were waiting by the doors. Liveried servants stood stiffly along the walls, ready to leap at a command, yet appearing neither to hear nor see. The sounds of the gathering floated from deeper in the manor. It did not look like a place where dark friends might attack. What message? He says he will wait for you on Toman Head. He has what you seek, and if you want it, you must follow. If you refuse to follow him, he says he will hound your blood and your people and those you love until you will face him. It sounds mad, of course, a man like that saying he will hound a lord. And yet, there was something about him. I think he is mad. He even denied you are a lord, as any eye can plainly see. But there is still something. What is it he carries with him with Trollocs to guard it? What is it you seek? Barthing seemed shocked at the directness of his own questions. So Barthanes knows that Fane is someone important in the hierarchy of the Dark Friends because he has certain holds over Barthanes, and yet he wasn't sure he was going to deliver that message because he was scheming. Is this message going to help me or hurt me? Can I use this to my advantage?
Well, it also gives you a little bit of a hint into what it is to be a dark friend. He knew this was a guy of importance, but he didn't know anything about him.
Yes.
He just knew he knew semi where he was on the ladder, but
and even as an important dark friend, he thought it was incomprehensible that Fane could, challenge a lord. I mean, he's a creepy, smelly commoner. How dare he? So it shows you kind of where Barthane's loyalties lie, and they lie with himself.
And also, I don't know if this is the arrogance of Barthanes or not, but this has got to be the first time Barthanes met a Trolloc. But yet he's just talking about them as if they were every day, and there was something important about what you have because Trollocs are guarding it. But he didn't freak out at the sight of Trollocs.
Yeah, because he's an important man. Why would he have to worry about things like that?
Mm-hmm.
But then we cut back to Tom, poor Tom, and the the hard life he has had since he's met these people, and this poor girl getting killed.
Mm-hmm.
We do get some Tom badassery, which is great. Not just that he takes these guys out, but how he takes them out. I love that ending scene of, you made one mistake. You should never have touched the girl. And then he jams a dagger in the guy's eye. But it is during this scene that we find out that Barthanes has been killed, because he assumes that Barthane sent these killers and he's going to go kill him. And the way he's been killed, very minor spoiler, but we won't say anything more about it. It was almost certainly something unnatural that did it, right? Not knowing even just at this point with what we know, he was literally torn apart. The only way they knew it was him was his head was sitting on top of the pile. If you meet Barthanes, you're too late. He is dead. His servants found him this morning, torn to pieces in his bedchamber. The only way they knew it was him was his head stuck on a spike over the fireplace. So torn to pieces is the hallmark of, it's kind of the calling card of a shadow creature that we are going to meet later.
Mm-hmm.
But it is still a bit confusing to me of why he was killed and who would have had him killed. Now, seemingly the reason he was killed was for what we were just talking about, is that he's supposed to be following the Dark Friend plan and he's still doing his own scheming.
Or he was just a loose end.
Or he was just a loose end, and now we have
well, and also he's a loose end that it actually benefits to take care of in a number of ways, because we see a theme coming forward with the dark end of chaos.
Yes.
And Barthanes would be an orderly representation of the dark if he was to win that battle between him and the king. So
yes, yeah. And I compared him to a Forsaken, and that's how he thinks. And there are those that we'll meet later who are very much like that. Their whole point in being Forsaken was to establish their own kingdom and have their own domain that they can rule. And there are others that are just kind of psychotic. I mean, you've brought up the mad scientist that you would only know if you read the Big White Book, and he is just kind of a nutter, right? So my best guess is that he was the only, perhaps twofold, is so chaos, like you said, but also he's probably the only one left on this end of the waygate who knows about Fane. That knows that this group of dark friends carrying something important went through the waygates, and he knows where he went. He was told he's going to Tolman Head, and now that thread has been snipped. But then the next curiosity that I noticed is when Zara, the innkeeper, notices these aren't Barthane's men. It's the worst kept secret in Karheen that he works for House Riaton, for Galdrian, the king. And Tom gets this look in his eye, and Zara says, just get out of here. You don't just sneak in and murder a king. But chaos has already started to spread, and perhaps that lends itself to your idea that that's why Barthanes was killed, because my next thought was, who fired the granaries and why? Because that is something that will certainly cause chaos and certainly weaken the king, because that's how the king keeps his hold over the people is bread and circuses.
Mhm.
He gives out grain to the commoners and keeps them entertained with all the shenanigans in the foregate. So if someone's firing the granaries, someone's taking a direct shot at the king's power.
Mhm.
And I guess, are we to assume that this is darkness the shadow trying to create problems in Cairhien?
Or if it's just a byproduct of a murder and the game of houses going at once as a retaliation for
You know what? It could very well be that is news has been spreading like wildfire that Barthanes is dead. And so now someone sees their chance
Mhm.
to jump up in power of, okay, well, Barthanes isn't in my way anymore. Let's take a shot at the king and really destabilize the top there.
Which still it all goes back to the murder. So it was still a product of the shadow. And with we see the scheming going ahead, it's not really always an accidental product.
Yeah, and then we kind of fade to black as we are given the distinct impression that Tom's badassery does not end with killing a couple of assassins, that he's going to go do something even bigger and worse. But then we go to Fane getting to Falm, and he shows a curious amount of knowledge when he gets before Turek. Because remember, one of the ways he convinces Turek that he is who he says he is he recognizes the banner as the, except for a minor change, that's the banner of one of Hawkwing's sons.
Yeah. Well, remember,
because he sent across the ocean.
He is becoming more and more Death as well, who
Exactly.
would know the banner.
Exactly. So Mordeth apparently has a vast amount of creepy knowledge and the ability to use that to his advantage to twist things. And so he spins this story about the horn being in their possession since the fall of Hawkwing, and his family being tasked to guard it until they can put it back in the hands of Hawkwing's descendants, where it rightfully belongs. And yet he's still not whole. He's still not completely in control of himself, because he has a moment of losing control where he wants the dagger, where he reflexively reaches out to try and grab the dagger.
I'm trying to remember, because he ends up not being able to get the dagger. We know that, but oh yeah, there's a lot of inner talk where he's trying to tell himself to be patient, and
then outwardly we get even more of the dangerous rigidity of the blood, the highborn of the Sanshin, and what that means. Because Turek's going to explain the the imperial politics that make Cairhien's game of houses look like a game of checkers, which is music to Mordeth's ears, because he's now hoping he gets sent back to the Empress, because that's the kind of place where he can
start whispering in ears.
Best. Yeah. Yes. That is exactly his thing.
Well, and Turok, and this is a good scene for showing that, even though the Doman scene was also pretty good, he's an interesting character in the whole series, because he's an antagonist without being connected to the light or the dark.
Yes.
And it's the good, bad, or indifferent. And realistically, he's indifferent. He's just following orders and living the life that he knows, which is that of a lord of the Shanshin, and pretty badass one at that, from a political and physical standpoint. So we get through that scene, and
then we get to stedding Sofu.
yeah. So we get to
Where-
see the internal workings of the Ogier now.
Right. So we know about the Ogier. Now we're actually going to see them. We're actually going to enter the place where they live. Which I find interesting. And I messaged you last night. I don't know if I've ever had this thought before, to realize that, oh, hey, they're hobbits. They're 8-foot tall hobbits. There are also some other clear influences there with how they act, but they are apart from the world. And Loyal has talked about this. This is one of the reasons he left, is they represent an idyllic way of life in a lot of ways, kind of a counterpoint to or a harmony with the traveling people, with the Tuatha, that this is this is a time of peace, agrarian idyllicism that has disappeared, but they're holding on to it.
Yeah, you'd brought up the Hobbit thing, and I see it, and I get your point there. This is where there's a lot of mixing and matching, just like we talk about with the Shinerans, which is, obviously Japanese culture, but obviously, like you said, the heavy French cavalry by look and feel. So it's an interesting take, though, because when we normally go back into kind of fantasy land, whether it's the Dungeons and Dragons world or the Hobbit type world, ogres are usually big bad uglies.
Yes.
And in this world, they're big and they can be bad, but they're not uglies. They're very gentle giants.
Yes.
And when in harmony with nature as well. So this is where he kind of changes the game with a lot of other fantasy, is this group of people. And I think it's a good little respite, because we got enough Trollocs. We don't need ogres as well.
Right. Yeah, we have the trolls, which have a lot of different variations in various mythologies. And now we have these ogres, which are a blend of the kind of pastoral idyllicism of the Hobbit, but then also the wise learnedness of kind of your classic high elf.
Well, it's kind of like he made it the antithesis of what we consider ogres, because we think big, dumb, bad, but they're big, but they're highly intelligent, very sentient, and very peaceful.
Right. And we get that when the Aiel and the Shienarans encounter each other and they're about to come to blows, and then the ogre get ticked off and remind them of their pact, of the peace of the stedding that is not supposed to be violated.
I forgot about that scene.
Yeah, we get another little tease. We meet the Maidens of the Spear for the first time, and we get a little bit of more of a tease of the Aiel, and they're glaring at Rand because they think he's one of them, and yet he's dressed like a wetlander and wielding a sword, which is gross to them. So they're giving him the stink eye. So
I'm just going to mention it, but we'll go into detail. I think it's book 4 or 5. I think it's book 4. But one of the important things I think you see here is kind of a tease to a little bit of foreshadowing, is notice that the Aiel sing as they're getting ready for battle. They sing a battle song coming into it. And then we'll leave it at that and talk about it in book 4.
Oh, no, that was actually mentioned way back when Perrin was with them, because
no, I'm talking about something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
About the song, because I just brain farted on his name and I like him. The leader of that band of the traveling people, when he's telling his story about crossing the waste, and he mentions that once they become men, Aiel will not sing anything except a battle song or a funeral dirge. Anyway, but we get a little bit of a tease there. Then we get a fun, we get kind of a fun bit of loyalness here, where he's getting stressed out and freaked out and doesn't want to meet the elders because he's afraid they'll ask uncomfortable questions. And yet he's also getting eyed by the ladies, by the lady Ogier, and it's making him twitchy and awkward. But I think the strangest bit of this, so they go before the elders and they say, give us a compelling reason why we should, break our rule of no one going through the waygate here. And they're actually forthcoming and tell what they're doing here. And then they're told, all right, well, it's not enough to hear about it. You have to see what it does. And they bring in, where was that? They bring in a guy who was caught by Machin Shin. And
I forgot about
this
that.
is always something. Now, I know Jordan did address this a few times, but I had always found it odd. So they bring this guy in who appears to be catatonic yet mobile, right? And they tell Verin to examine him. Now, she can't use the power here, clearly, because they're in a stedding. So we're not sure what she does, but somehow she's able to touch him and realize that he doesn't have a soul, that he's just an empty shell.
Well, I think they can still feel dark friends and think, or not dark friends, feel creatures of the dark and stuff. They just can't touch the source. So all the benefits that go along with it are there, I believe. Now, it never explains that you could also feel that somebody has a soul or not, but we're just making assumptions there. What did you find out what Jordan said about it?
No, I looked briefly before we started recording and I couldn't find it. So I'll go digging around again later. And
now, there is something about Verin we find out many books later that there's a possibility she could touch the source at this point because of something she has. So,
but the elders wouldn't know that.
That's true. That's true.
The elders wouldn't know that, so they understand somehow that she can sense what it is they're trying to show her.
Which, if it is just a plot hole, it's a very minor one for
it's certainly a curiosity, but then it also, when you realize what Machin Shin does and that it just kind of is a cool breeze to Fane, it's an added layer of his creepy badness. It's like, this is what Machin Shin does to a normal person. And Fane is just like, shrug. So they got to do what they got to do. So they go to the waygate, and again, Machin Shin is waiting there, and it's inexplicable. But they figure, well, that's that. And then Ingtar gets a little bit crazy because of his need to get the horn. Then somebody mentions portal stone. If we had one of those, we could go through.
That's a pretty dramatic scene. How much do we want to go into that? Because I mean, we can break down the visions and stuff, but
which one? The way through the portal stone?
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to hurry up and get there so we would have time to talk about it. Because I knew you found the whole concept, the whole quantum concept interesting. And now, again, nothing's on accident, and Jordan is layering here. So we learn about the worlds of what if from the first go through the portal stone, and now that door that was cracked is going to be thrown wide open,
Mhm.
and we're really going to see what that really means.
Yeah. So the first trip through the portal stone, we see them just go from one world to the other and have to live in that world. Where he's trying to get to a different place in the same world, he ends up taking them through alternate realities of themselves
Yeah.
versus to just another place.
Yeah.
And
My guess of what's going on here, in a kind of sci-fi physics sense, is that what he's done, since he doesn't know what he's doing and he's just trying to force it with raw power, because he is incredibly powerful with the one power, is he's trying to basically create a wormhole between the portal stone here and the portal stone on Tillman Head.
mhm.
And in trying to bore his way through all of these realities, he's exposing them to it.
Mhm.
And that's why, as they're kind of getting sucked along through this wormhole, that's how they're experiencing, not just glimpsing, but experiencing these lives as if they had lived them.
Well,
And
and it's also kind of we're looking at the difference between distance and the fabric of reality. To
mhm,
be in the same place in a different reality is a shorter distance than being in a different place in the same reality. And so you kind of see the difference between what would probably be an easier transition if you had this access to other realities,
mhm.
versus actually trying to stay in the same reality but change where you physically are.
Um,
And we'll get into more of that because I don't want to give away too much about how they work when we get there, but when we get to traveling
yes.
and how that's different than what I just described.
And he goes through countless numbers of these. So we can talk about some of the individual ones that are described in more in depth, but kind of skipping to the end, 531 is where we get to the end of this, and he was a soldier, he was a shepherd, he was a beggar and a king, he was a farmer, gleeman, sailor, carpenter. He was born, lived, and died in Aiel. He died mad. He died rotting. He died of sickness, accident, age. He was executed, and multitudes cheered his death. He proclaimed himself the dragon reborn and flung his banner across the sky. He ran from the power and hid. He lived and died, never knowing. He held off the madness and the sickness for years. He succumbed between two winters. Sometimes Moraine came and took him away from the two rivers, alone or with those of his friends who had survived Winter Night. Sometimes she did not. Sometimes other Aes Sedai came for him. Sometimes the Red Ajah. Egwene married him. Egwene, stern-faced in the stole of the Emerald seat, led the Aes Sedai who gentled him. Egwene, with tears in her eyes, plunged a dagger into his heart, and he thanked her as he died. That's actually a tease for something later. He loved other women, married other women. Elaine and Min and a fair-haired farmer's daughter met on the road to Camelin, and women he had never seen before he lived those lives. 100 lives, more, so many he could not count them. And at the end of every life, as he lay dying, as he drew his final breath, a voice whispered in his ear, "I have won again, Lews Therin."
Mm-hmm. So even though you're manipulating the very fabric of space and time, you're still who you are. So back to this concept of fate and soul. And the dark one is still the same everywhere you go. The light is still the same everywhere you go.
Were there any of those particular lives that you wanted to talk about
No,
that we
because I
saw in a
think,
little more detail?
yeah, I think we, it's just, it's too, I think it's just, it'd be too much similar to what we talked about with the rings.
Mhm.
Because you see basically the same concepts in the ones they highlight.
Right.
And we're going to get plenty of that when Egwene finally gets to go in the rings and stuff too.
Um,
But I guess the other important point is the effect it seems to have on everybody else too, because apparently it wasn't just him, right?
mhm,
He
mhm.
put everybody else through it.
He's the only one who we see those
Mhm.
lives. We just kind of get an idea of what the others experienced. And I find Verin's reaction to that curious. The others are kind of in varying degrees of freak out, and Verin's just like, well, that was interesting. I never would have thought that about myself. So she's taking it as she does, which is academically.
Mhm.
Um, I the, the one that's interesting to me that kind of jumps out, kind of knowing more down the road, and we actually see this, I think, in some other what if kind of scenarios, that in this, I think it's this second one, um, the Sanshin have won. And they don't really know about it. They don't care about it in the Two Rivers because apparently they're so backwoods that not even the Sanshin have come there. But they've basically won. They've basically conquered the world, or most of it, and they can't stop what's coming. In fact, when the Trollocs come storming out of the Blight, they are thrown back in full rout. So that the story of Manetherin that we heard at the very beginning of the Eye of the World comes full circle, and we see it again in action here. But that's not his destiny. That's not what needs to happen for him to confront the Dark One.
Mhm.
And so he is killed because that's not how he is supposed to confront it.
And then I think next we find out that time has passed and it would have been faster just to march.
Yes, because now it is fall. It is well into fall.
So the shortcut through many lives and a lot of trauma has lost them time.
Yeah.
And Ingtar goes crazy again.
Yep. Because he's going to. Yep, he's going to find it no matter what. But of course, Rand is Rand, and so his concern is, I've got to find Fane, and I hope he hasn't given up on waiting for me and gone after my loved ones as he said he would.
Mhm. So let's go ahead and start wrapping up there for the day, and
Yeah.
then we'll finish with just the end of the book at that
But
point.
yeah, because the next bit are the
Back to the girls.
back to the girls, and we actually get quite a bit of that before we get back to the boys, because of what happens to them, and it's a pretty big deal. Not just there, but this is going to have serious impact on their character, on those characters in particular, but then also the larger events of the tower because of what happens. There are going to be ramifications there. But I think we can definitely finish it up the next time.
Mhm.
We are getting close, and it's a lot of action to the end.
Mhm. And there's a fair bit of what I think a little bit of irony at the end as well,
Mhm.
considering who the major players are. So yeah, this book was, again, we thought we'd get through it quicker, but it is a lot of pretext to a lot of stuff without a whole lot going on until the end. It does have actually a more substantially powerful ending than the Eye of the World did.
Yeah, I think as much as the kind of the meat of the Eye of the World I thought was a better book. I think we both thought that. The climax we've talked about was in the Eye of the World was a little bit of a letdown, simply because it kind of felt rushed. As I felt like we
Yeah,
needed more there.
You've got about 10 pages to wrap everything up.
And here we're going to have several chapters
Mhm.
to wrap everything up, and we have the ultimate final battle of this book. We have quite a bit there of not just description of the action that's going on, but then we're getting it from Rand's perspective. And I kind of get it at the Eye of the World is kind of the downside to the way Jordan writes, is he was writing from Rand's perspective, and Rand is completely clueless as to what's going on.
Mhm.
And so while I get that, you also have to find a way to describe what's going on so that the reader isn't as lost as Rand is. And I don't think he struck that balance in Eye of the World. And because Rand knows more here, we're going to know more as the reader.
Yep, that's a good place to end it. I think that's good parting thoughts. So Thursday we're going to do more real life stuff.
Damn it.
Well, you said you had something for me, and
I do. I don't want to do it, but it's going to make me real mad. I'm still mad about it.
We still need to see if we can get banned, and I don't want to mix them because I want to know exactly what we get banned for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I don't want to have to speculate if it was this topic or this topic. Everything will be backed up on Rumble though. I'm caught up until the ones we just did with Chuck, which takes a while to edit the videos. So I think it should be done editing by now, but because they have to render.
All right. Well, then we will see y'all next time for annoyingly real life talk.
And then after that, we'll do another real time because we gotta space them out because
Yep.
because real life stuff sucks more than the books.
Mm-hmm.